The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Maria Alvarez arrived at Westlake University. The campus was quiet at 5:30 a.m., just how she liked it. Clutching her worn thermos of coffee, she made her way across the dewy grass toward the mathematics building, a place she had cleaned for nearly 7 years now. Maria was 42, with deep brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, which wasn't often these days. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, a few strands of gray beginning to show. She wore the same blue uniform every day, a bit faded from countless washes but always clean and pressed. The university's cleaning staff badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, swinging gently as she walked. The security guard nodded at her as she entered. "Morning, Maria." "Good morning, Mr. Lee," she replied softly, her words carrying a gentle accent from her homeland of El Salvador. The halls of the mathematics building felt like an old friend to Maria. Every classroom, every office, every inch of tile floor was familiar territory after so many years. She liked this building best of all the ones she cleaned. There was something about the formulas left on the whiteboards, the neat rows of books with their mysterious symbols and equations, that made her feel at home. Maria set down her cleaning cart outside room 103, Professor Richard Chen's classroom. She could have cleaned it with her eyes closed. 15 rows of desks, the large whiteboard covering the front wall, the professor's desk with its never-ending piles of papers. She started with the trash bins, then moved to dusting the shelves lined with textbooks and mathematical journals. Professor Chen was one of the university's most respected calculus professors. At 55, he had been teaching for over 30 years and had a reputation that preceded him: brilliant, demanding, and sometimes a bit harsh. Students feared and respected him in equal measure. He had written 3 textbooks, won numerous teaching awards, and was known for pushing his students to their limits. Maria had seen hundreds of students come through his classroom doors over the years. Some thrived under his tough approach, others crumbled. But regardless of how they performed, Professor Chen rarely remembered their names after the semester ended. And he had certainly never bothered to learn Maria's name. Despite seeing her nearly every day for 7 years, to him, she was just the cleaning lady, invisible, a background fixture like the desks or the clock on the wall. What Professor Chen didn't know, what nobody at Westlake knew, was that Maria had a secret, a passion that she had kept hidden away since she was a young girl growing up in a small village outside San Salvador. Maria loved mathematics. As she carefully wiped down the whiteboard, her eyes lingered on the complex equations Professor Chen had left from yesterday's lecture. Differential calculus. She recognized the patterns, the symbols, the elegant dance of numbers and variables. Without thinking, she mentally solved one of the equations, checking her work twice in her head as she continued cleaning. Back in El Salvador, Maria had been the brightest student in her small school. Her teacher, Miss Gonzalez, had once told her mother, "Your daughter has a gift for numbers. She sees patterns where others see only confusion." But when Maria was 14, her father died suddenly and her education ended. There was no money for books, no time for school when there were younger siblings to feed. Life had taken Maria down a different path. Marriage at 19 to a kind man named Diego. Immigration to America at 27, searching for better opportunities. A cleaning job at the university after Diego passed away from an unexpected heart attack 5 years ago. But throughout it all, Maria's love for mathematics never dimmed. At home, in her small apartment 15 minutes from campus, she had a bookshelf filled with discarded mathematics textbooks she'd rescued from dumpsters during student move-out days. Calculus 1 and 2, linear algebra, differential equations, treasures others had thrown away. At night, after her shifts, she would sit at her kitchen table and work through problems by lamplight, using pencil stubs and the backs of old flyers for scratch paper. Over the years, she had developed her own methods, her own ways of seeing the problems. Without formal training, she approached mathematics with an intuition that was both unorthodox and powerful. What she lacked in technical vocabulary, she made up for with a deep understanding of mathematical relationships. As Maria emptied Professor Chen's waste bin, she spotted a crumpled sheet of paper with a half-finished equation. Without thinking, she smoothed it out. There was a mistake in the work. The student had differentiated incorrectly. Maria could see where they went wrong. "I would have factored first," she murmured to herself in Spanish, her finger tracing the equation. Did you say something? Maria jumped, nearly dropping the paper. Standing in the doorway was Professor Chen, his silver-framed glasses perched on his nose, a leather briefcase in his hand. He always arrived early, but not usually this early. No, sir. Sorry, sir, Maria said, quickly tossing the paper back in the trash and returning to her cleaning cart. I was just talking to myself. Professor Chen gave her a brief nod and walked to his desk, immediately becoming absorbed in organizing his notes for the morning lecture. Maria silently continued her work, moving to the windows to wipe down the sills. Through the glass, she could see students beginning to cross the campus green, backpacks slung over shoulders, paper coffee cups in hand. The early morning class would be filling up soon. Maria worked faster, knowing Professor Chen preferred her to be gone before students arrived. As she gathered her supplies, she heard him mutter in frustration. He was staring at a textbook, his brow furrowed. This example is all wrong, he said, apparently to himself. How did the editor miss this? Maria paused, her hand on her cart. She could see the page from where she stood. It was a problem involving optimization, finding the maximum volume of a box with a fixed surface area. She had worked through a similar problem just last week from a textbook she'd found. For a brief moment she considered saying something, pointing out that the solution in the book had skipped a step in the derivation. But then she remembered her place. Who would listen to a cleaning lady about calculus? Maria pushed her cart toward the door just as the first students began to file in. Young faces, bright with promise and possibility, futures stretching out before them full of opportunity. They barely glanced at her as they took their seats, chatting about last night's party or tomorrow's exam. One girl dropped her notebook as she passed Maria. Papers scattered across the floor, covered in neat handwriting and careful calculations. Maria quickly knelt to help gather them. Thank you, the girl said, accepting the papers with a distracted smile. Her name was Lin, Maria remembered. She often stayed late after class, asking Professor Chen questions that made even him pause to think. You're welcome, Maria replied. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Maria wondered what Lin would think if she knew that the woman in the blue uniform understood every equation in that notebook. As Maria wheeled her cart into the hallway, she heard Professor Chen begin his lecture, his voice confident and clear. Today we'll be exploring the applications of partial derivatives in thermodynamics. Please open your textbooks to page 347. Maria continued down the hall to the next classroom, but her mind stayed behind with the equations on Professor Chen's board. She solved them as she cleaned, finding a peaceful rhythm in the dual work of her hands and mind. That was how Maria had lived for years, moving invisibly through a world of knowledge, absorbing what she could, keeping her passion secret. Nobody looked twice at a middle-aged cleaning lady. Nobody suspected that behind her quiet exterior lay a mind that understood the language of calculus as naturally as she understood her native Spanish. But life has a way of revealing what's hidden. And for Maria, the revelation would come sooner than she could have imagined, in the most unexpected and public way possible. As she finished her morning rounds and prepared to clock out, Maria had no idea that in just 24 hours, everything would change. That the carefully constructed walls between her two worlds, the world of cleaning floors and the world of mathematical discovery, were about to come crashing down. She simply checked her schedule for tomorrow, noted that she was assigned to room 103 again, and headed home to her small apartment where her books were waiting. The next morning arrived with a steady downpour of rain. Maria stepped off the bus, her umbrella fighting against the wind as she hurried toward the mathematics building. Water splashed against her worn work shoes, and by the time she reached the entrance, the bottom of her blue uniform pants were damp despite her efforts. Nasty out there, Mr. Lee commented as she signed in, shaking water from her umbrella. April showers, Maria replied with a small smile, though it was already late May. The routine was the same as always. Cart, supplies, empty classrooms waiting to be cleaned. But something felt different today. As Maria made her way to room 103, she noticed the lights were already on. Unusual for 5:45 a.m. She peeked through the small window in the door and saw Professor Chen pacing back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back, lips moving silently, as if rehearsing something. Maria hesitated. She preferred cleaning when rooms were empty, but her schedule was tight and she needed to finish the mathematics building before 8 a.m. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly and entered. Good morning, Professor. I can come back later if— No. He waved dismissively without looking up. Go ahead with your work. I'm preparing for a difficult lecture. Maria quietly went about her usual routine, starting at the back of the room. She could hear Professor Chen mumbling about partial differential equations and boundary conditions as he scribbled notes on a small pad of paper. Occasionally he would stop, frown, and erase something vigorously. As she worked, Maria glanced at the whiteboard where he had written several complex equations. One caught her eye, a partial differential equation related to heat transfer. She recognized it from a chapter she'd been studying in one of her rescued textbooks. Professor Chen suddenly slammed his hand on the desk. This example won't work, he muttered. I need something that will actually demonstrate the concept clearly. Maria continued dusting, trying to be invisible, but she couldn't help watching as he erased part of an equation and rewrote it differently. That won't converge, she thought to herself, noticing an error in his approach. She bit her lip and focused on cleaning the windowsills. Students began arriving 40 minutes later, filling the seats with the squeaking of chairs and the rustling of papers. Maria moved to the corners of the room, trying to finish quickly. Usually she was gone before class began, but the rain had delayed her bus, and Professor Chen's early arrival had slowed her pace. We'll begin with a review of Monday's material, Professor Chen announced to the now full classroom. Who can explain the significance of boundary conditions when solving the heat equation? Silence. A few students looked down at their notes in panic. Others avoided eye contact entirely. No one? We spent an entire lecture on this topic. A young man in the front row tentatively raised his hand. Boundary conditions tell us, what happens at the edges of the system? Professor Chen sighed. That's barely scratching the surface. Mr. Patel, boundary conditions are crucial because they determine the unique solution from an infinite set of possible solutions to our differential equation. He turned to the whiteboard and wrote, a new equation, more complex than the previous ones. Maria recognized it as a two-dimensional heat transfer problem with time dependency. Let's try something more concrete, Professor Chen said, his frustration evident. Imagine a flat metal plate with the edges kept at fixed temperatures. We want to determine the temperature distribution across the entire plate once equilibrium is reached. He sketched a square on the board, labeling the temperatures around the edges. Maria paused her cleaning, drawn in by the problem. It was similar to one she had worked through just last month. Who can set up the appropriate partial differential equation and boundary conditions for this problem? More silence. One student coughed. Another shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Professor Chen's expression darkened. Did anyone actually read the assigned chapter? Lynn, the student who had dropped her notebook the day before, slowly raised her hand. I think we'd use the Laplace equation since it's a steady-state heat problem. Yes, finally, Professor Chen said, writing the equation on the board. And the general approach to solving this would be? Lynn hesitated. Separation of variables? Correct, but can you actually carry it through? Lynn began to explain but stumbled halfway through. The method required careful application of Fourier series, and she was getting lost in the mathematics. Professor Chen cut her off with a wave of his hand. This is precisely why I stress the importance of working through all the example problems. Theory without practice is useless in mathematics. The classroom was tense now. Maria could feel the students' discomfort as she wiped down the last desk in the back row. She should have left already, but something kept her there, watching. Professor Chen wrote a new problem on the board, a variation on the previous one, but with non-constant boundary conditions that made it significantly more difficult. Let's see if anyone can at least begin to solve this, he challenged, turning back to face the class of 30 nervous students. His eyes swept over them, then landed on Maria standing quietly with her cleaning cloth in the back corner. A strange expression crossed his face, something between annoyance and inspiration. Perhaps, he said, his voice taking on a mocking tone, we're making this too complicated. Maybe we should seek wisdom from unexpected places. Students turned in their seats following his gaze to Maria, who froze like a deer in headlights. You there? Professor Chen said, pointing at her. Our cleaning lady has been listening to these lectures for years now? Perhaps she's absorbed some calculus through osmosis. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the classroom. Maria felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. Would you care to show us how to solve this problem? Professor Chen asked. extending a dry erase marker toward her. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The room fell silent. Maria stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. Every instinct told her to excuse herself and leave immediately. She could feel 30 pairs of young eyes on her, and one pair of challenging ones from Professor Chen. Time seemed to stretch. In that moment, Maria thought about her father, who had always told her to be proud of her mind. She thought about Miss Gonzalez from her childhood, who had seen potential in her. She thought about the night spent poring over mathematics books by the dim light of her kitchen table lamp. Before she could stop herself, Maria placed her cleaning cloth on the cart and walked slowly to the front of the classroom. The only sound was the squeak of her work shoes on the tiled floor. She took the marker from Professor Chen's hand. His expression shifted from mockery to confusion. Standing before the whiteboard, Maria took a deep breath. The problem looked intimidating, written in formal mathematical language, but she understood what it was asking. Heat distribution across a surface with variable boundary conditions. She began writing, her hand moving with surprising steadiness. First, she rewrote the partial differential equation in a slightly different form, one that made more sense to her intuitive way of thinking about the problem. Behind her, she heard whispers from the students. Professor Chen cleared his throat but said nothing. Maria continued step by step, breaking down the complex problem into manageable pieces. She didn't use all the formal terminology. She didn't know all the proper names for theorems and methods, but her approach was clear and methodical. When she needed to use Fourier series, she simply wrote, "We can represent this function as a sum of sines and cosines," and showed the pattern. Where others might have cited Green's theorem, she simply demonstrated the transformation directly. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The whispering had stopped. The only sound was the squeak of the marker against the whiteboard and the gentle patter of rain against the windows. Professor Chen had taken a seat at an empty desk in the front row, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The students were leaning forward now, watching with growing amazement as the cleaning lady filled the board with equations. Maria was lost in the problem, her mind clear, her movements confident. In this moment, she wasn't a cleaning woman who had left school at 14. She was simply a person who understood mathematics, who saw the elegant patterns hiding within complicated problems. Finally, she wrote down the solution, a series expression that gave the temperature at any point on the plate. She circled it twice and stepped back. For the first time since she had started, Maria looked at the class. 30 faces stared back at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe. Professor Chen's mouth hung slightly open, his arms no longer crossed but hanging limply at his sides. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Lin, from the third row, began to clap. Another student joined in, then another, until the entire classroom filled with applause. Maria felt a strange mixture of pride and terror. She had never been the center of attention like this. She had kept her mathematical ability hidden for so long that sharing it felt like exposing a secret part of her soul. Professor Chen slowly rose from his seat and approached the board. He examined her work carefully, tracing the steps with his finger. Then he turned to face her. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear over the continued applause of the students. Maria clutched the marker tightly, suddenly aware of what she had done, what she had revealed. "I'm just the cleaning lady," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've always loved numbers." The classroom remained in stunned silence after the applause died down. Professor Chen stared at the whiteboard, then back at Maria, his expression a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The students whispered among themselves, stealing glances at the cleaning lady who had just solved a problem many of them couldn't even begin to approach. "Class dismissed early today," Professor Chen announced suddenly. "Review chapters 7 and 8 for Monday." The students gathered their belongings, their excited chatter filling the room as they filed out. Several paused to look at Maria's work on the board, taking photos with their phones. A few nodded respectfully to her as they passed. Lynn smiled and gave her a small thumbs up. When the last student left, Maria turned to her cleaning cart. "I should finish my rounds," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. "Wait!" Professor Chen's voice stopped her. He closed the classroom door and turned to face her. Please sit down. Maria hesitated, then perched on the edge of a student desk. Professor Chen pulled up a chair across from her. I owe you an apology, he said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. I was trying to make a point to my students, but I ended up being the one who learned something. Maria nodded slightly but remained silent. Your solution was elegant. Unconventional but elegant, he continued. You found a path that isn't in any of the standard textbooks. It just made sense to me that way, Maria replied, her voice soft but steady. Where did you learn calculus? Your approach suggests formal training, but it's different. Maria looked down at her hands, calloused from years of cleaning and work. I never finished school. Not officially. Then how? She took a deep breath and told him her story. About growing up in El Salvador. About Miss Gonzalez, who first noticed her gift for numbers, about leaving school at 14 when her father died. She told him about immigrating to America, about working cleaning jobs to support herself after her husband passed away. When I started working here at Westlake, I found a calculus textbook in the trash during move-out week. It was like finding treasure, she explained, a small smile crossing her face at the memory. The student had written notes in the margins. Good notes. They helped me understand the formal language. Professor Chen listened intently as Maria described how she had slowly built her collection of discarded math books, how she worked through problems late into the night after her shifts. And I listen, she added. I've cleaned this classroom nearly every day for 7 years. I hear the lectures, the questions, the explanations. I've probably heard you teach the same concepts dozens of different ways. But understanding complex partial differential equations, just from overhearing lectures and reading on your own, Professor? Chen shook his head in amazement. That's extraordinary, Maria shrugged. Numbers make sense to me. They always have. They follow rules. They're beautiful. Professor Chen smiled at that, a genuine smile, perhaps the first Maria had ever seen from him. Yes, they are. A knock at the door interrupted them. The department head, Dr. Wanda Patel, poked her head in. Richard, are you ready for the faculty meeting? It started 5 minutes. Her voice trailed off as she noticed Maria sitting there. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were busy. Wanda, come in, Professor Chen said, standing up. This is... He paused, realizing he didn't know Maria's name. Maria Alvarez, Maria supplied, rising quickly from her seat. I should get back to work. Ms. Alvarez just solved Kowalski's variant of the heat equation, Professor Chen announced. With an approach I've never seen before, Dr. Patel's eyebrows rose. The cleaning staff solves differential equations in their spare time? Apparently this one does, he replied. And quite brilliantly. Dr. Patel looked skeptical but intrigued. Is that so? Professor Chen gestured to the whiteboard covered in Maria's neat handwriting. See for yourself. As Dr. Patel examined the board, Maria shifted uncomfortably. This kind of attention was entirely foreign to her. For years she had moved through these halls like a ghost, present but unseen. Now suddenly people were looking at her, talking about her, examining her work. This is unusual, Dr. Patel said, finally turning back to face Maria. Where did you study mathematics? She's self-taught, Professor Chen answered before Maria could respond. Can you believe it? Dr. Patel's expression was unreadable. That's quite remarkable, Ms. Alvarez. Richard, we really should get to the meeting. Perhaps you could continue this conversation another time? Professor Chen nodded reluctantly. Yes, of course, he turned to Maria. Would you be willing to meet with me again? Perhaps after your shift one day next week? I'd like to talk more about your approach to mathematics. Maria nodded, surprised by the request. Yes, I could do that. After they left, Maria stood alone in the classroom, staring at the equations she had written. They looked different somehow, more significant now that others had seen them, had recognized what they meant. For the first time, her private passion had entered the public world. She quickly finished cleaning the room, carefully erasing half the board, but leaving her solution intact. As she pushed her cart into the hallway, she noticed several students had gathered nearby, watching her with curious expressions. Word had spread fast. The rest of Maria's day passed in a blur. Other professors gave her strange looks as she cleaned their offices. A couple of students tried to ask her questions about calculus as she emptied trash bins. By lunchtime, she had taken to keeping her head down, focusing intently on her work. At the end of her shift, Maria's supervisor, Mrs. Garcia, called her into the small office near the janitor's closet. "Is everything okay, Rosa?" Maria asked, using her supervisor's first name as she always did. They had worked together for years and had developed a friendly relationship. Rosa looked concerned. "I got a call from the mathematics department. Something about you solving equations in Professor Chen's class?" "What happened?" Maria sighed and explained the morning's events. Rosa listened with widening eyes. "Dios mío, Maria, you never told me you were some kind of math genius." "I'm not a genius," Maria protested. "I just like math. It makes sense to me." "Well, whatever it is, people are talking. Dr. Patel wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. She said it's important." Maria's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Am I in trouble?" "I didn't mean to disrupt the class." Rosa shook her head. "I don't think so. But it's unusual, you have to admit. The cleaning lady outsmarts the professor? That's not something that happens every day." After clocking out, Maria walked to the bus stop, her mind swirling with the day's events. As she waited, she spotted Lynn approaching, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hi," Lynn said, slightly out of breath as if she had been running. "I'm glad I caught you." Maria nodded politely but said nothing. "What you did today in class was amazing," Lynn continued. "Everyone's talking about it. Professor Chen is like famous for being impossible to impress, and you left him speechless." Maria felt her cheeks warm. "It wasn't my intention to show anyone up." "No, that's not what I meant," Lynn said quickly. "It's just—" It was inspiring. "Most of us have had years of formal training, and you just—" She gestured vaguely with her hands. "I've had years of training too," Maria replied. "Just not in a classroom." Lynn smiled. "That's what makes it even more impressive." She hesitated, then asked, "How did you learn, if you don't mind me asking?" Maria was silent for a moment, considering the question. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had been interested in her mind, her methods, her journey. "One step at a time," she answered finally. "I found patterns. I made mistakes. I tried different approaches until something worked." She paused. "And I never stopped being curious." Lynn nodded thoughtfully. "That's how real mathematics happens. Not just memorizing formulas." Her bus arrived and she stepped toward it. "I hope we see you again in the department." As Lynn's bus pulled away, Maria's own bus approached. She boarded and found a seat by the window, watching the university buildings recede in the distance. For 7 years, she had kept two worlds separate, her work life of cleaning and her private life of mathematical exploration. Now those worlds had collided in ways she couldn't have imagined. At home, Maria made herself a simple dinner, then sat at her kitchen table surrounded by her collection of mathematics books. She opened her notebook, a cheap composition book filled with her careful handwriting, problems and solutions dating back years. She turned to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Then she began to work through a problem she had seen on a whiteboard in the graduate students' lounge earlier that week. Something about optimization in 3 dimensions. Her pencil moved swiftly across the paper as she lost herself in the familiar comfort of numbers and equations. But tonight felt different. For the first time, she wasn't just solving problems for herself. She was preparing for tomorrow, for questions, for possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine before. Maria worked late into the night, unaware that across town Professor Chen was doing the same, reviewing her solution, researching unconventional approaches to calculus, and drafting an email to several colleagues about an extraordinary cleaning lady who saw mathematics in a way he had never considered. Maria arrived at the university 30 minutes earlier than usual the next morning. She had slept poorly, her mind replaying yesterday's events on an endless loop. She had chosen her clothes carefully, her newest pair of dark blue pants and a simple white blouse she normally saved for church. Her cleaning uniform was folded neatly in her bag for her shift later. The mathematics department office was on the 3rd floor, a place Maria usually only entered to empty trash bins and vacuum the carpet. Today she approached as a visitor, her heart beating rapidly as she knocked on Dr. Patel's door. "Come in," called a voice from inside. Maria entered to find not just Dr. Patel, but Professor Chen and another man she didn't recognize sitting around a small conference table. They all stood when she walked in. "Ms. Alvarez, thank you for coming," Dr. Patel said, gesturing to an empty chair. "This is Dr. Thomas Hernandez from our Applied Mathematics program." Dr. Hernandez, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, extended his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Alvarez. Maria shook his hand nervously and sat down, placing her bag carefully under her chair. Am I in trouble? She asked directly, deciding it was best to know right away. The three professors exchanged glances. Professor Chen spoke first. Quite the opposite, actually. We've been discussing what happened yesterday and, well, we'd like to learn more about your background in mathematics. For the next half hour, Maria answered their questions. About her childhood in El Salvador, about the books she'd collected, about her methods for teaching herself complex concepts. Dr. Hernandez occasionally made notes. Professor Chen nodded with interest at her descriptions of how she visualized mathematical problems. Dr. Patel mostly listened, her expression thoughtful. Would you mind showing us how you approach a different type of problem? Dr. Hernandez asked eventually, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Maria looked down at a complex optimization problem, something about maximizing the volume of a container with certain constraints. Different from the heat transfer equation, but still within her range of understanding. She picked up a pen and began working through it, talking aloud as she went. First, I need to understand what we're looking for. The largest possible volume, with these limitations on materials. The three professors watched in silence as she worked. At one point, she crossed out an approach and tried a different angle. This way is clearer, she explained almost to herself. When she finished, Dr. Hernandez took the paper and examined her work. He looked up at his colleagues with raised eyebrows. Remarkable. She's using a variation of Lagrangian multipliers, but with an intuitive geometric approach that simplifies the process. Is that right? Maria asked, suddenly worried she'd made a mistake. Yes, Dr. Hernandez said, smiling warmly. Very right. And very clever. Dr. Patel leaned forward. Ms. Alvarez, I have a rather unusual question. Would you be interested in formally studying mathematics? Here at Westlake? Maria stared at her in shock. You mean taking classes? Initially, yes. But potentially more than that. Dr. Patel glanced at her colleagues before continuing. We believe you have a rare talent. The kind of mathematical intuition that can't be taught. I'm a cleaning lady, Maria said softly. I didn't even finish high school. That can be addressed, Professor Chen interjected. There are equivalency exams, alternative admissions pathways. And the cost, Maria began. There are options there as well, Dr. Patel said. Scholarships, work-study programs. Maria felt overwhelmed. This conversation seemed unreal, like something from a dream. Just 2 days ago, she had been invisible to these people. Now they were talking about her becoming a student. I would need to keep working, she said finally. I have rent to pay bills, Dr. Hernandez nodded. What if we could arrange a part-time position in the department? Something with more flexible hours than your current job, allowing time for studies. Maria looked between the three professors trying to process what they were suggesting. Why would you do this for me? The question hung in the air for a moment before Professor Chen answered. Because talent like yours shouldn't be mopping floors. It should be solving problems that matter. After the meeting concluded, Maria walked slowly down the hallway, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had agreed to think about their offer and meet again next week. In the meantime, Dr. Patel would look into admissions requirements, and Professor Chen would draft a proposal for a department position. Maria changed into her uniform in the staff restroom and began her regular cleaning routine, though nothing felt regular anymore. As she worked, she found herself paying special attention to the mathematics written on whiteboards, seeing them with new eyes not just as interesting puzzles, but as potential pathways to a different future. During her lunch break, she sat alone on a bench outside the science building, eating her sandwich and watching students cross the quad. Young people with backpacks and bright futures. Could she really become one of them? At 42? Is this seat taken? Maria looked up to see Lynn standing there holding a paper coffee cup. No, please, Maria said, moving her lunch bag to make room. Lynn sat down. I heard you had a meeting with Dr. Patel and Professor Chen this morning. The whole department's buzzing about it. News travels fast, Maria remarked, slightly uncomfortable with being the subject of gossip. That's university life, Lynn said with a smile. So, what happened? Maria hesitated, then decided there was no harm in telling her. They talked about me possibly taking classes. Studying mathematics formally, Lynn's face lit up. That's amazing! Are you going to do it? I don't know yet. It's complicated. Because of your job? That, and Maria paused, searching for words. I'm not like the other students. I'm older. My education is different, Lynn considered this. You know, my mother went back to college when she was 40. She said it was the best decision she ever made. What did she study? Nursing. She'd been a waitress all my life. Now she works at Chicago General. Lynn took a sip of her coffee. She was scared at first, being older than everyone, having a different background. But she said that gave her an advantage. She knew why she was there. Maria nodded thoughtfully. I'd know why I was there too. For the math? For the math, Maria agreed. Later that afternoon, as Maria was cleaning the faculty lounge, she overheard two professors talking about her. It's a lovely story. But realistically, what are they expecting? That she'll become some sort of mathematician? At her age with no formal training? The voice belonged to Dr. Wilson from the physics department. Chen seems convinced she's some kind of undiscovered genius, replied another voice Maria didn't recognize. Clever solution doesn't make a mathematician. There's a reason we have rigorous training programs. This whole thing feels like a publicity stunt. Maria continued wiping down tables, pretending not to hear, but their words stung. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was fooling herself, entertaining an impossible dream. At the end of her shift, Maria found a note taped to her locker. Please see me before you leave, Professor Chen. With a sigh, she gathered her things and headed to his office. She found him surrounded by stacks of papers, typing furiously on his computer. He looked up when she knocked on the open door. Ah, Maria, come in, please. He gestured to a chair. I wanted to give you something. He handed her a book. Introduction to Topology by Dr. Thomas Hernandez. Dr. Hernandez thought you might find this interesting. It's his own textbook. He signed it for you. Maria opened the cover to find an inscription. To Maria, mathematics finds a way. Looking forward to seeing yours. Thomas Hernandez. Thank you, she said, running her fingers over the glossy cover. But I heard some professors talking today. They don't think this makes sense. Me studying mathematics formally. Professor Chen frowned. Did Wilson say something? He's always been resistant to unconventional approaches. Maria shrugged. They have a point. I'm not a typical student. No, you're not, Professor Chen agreed. You're better. Better? Most of my students learn mathematics because they have to. It's a requirement for their degree, a step toward a career. You learn it because you love it, because you see its beauty. He leaned forward. That can't be taught, Maria. But there's so much I don't know. Proper terminology, historical context, formal proof, those are details. Important details, yes, but still just details. The core, the ability to see patterns, to find elegant solutions, you already have that. Maria clutched the book to her chest. I'm scared, she admitted. What if I fail? Professor Chen's expression softened. Then you'll have tried. But I don't think you will fail. I've been teaching for 30 years. I know potential when I see it. As Maria rode the bus home that evening, she opened Dr. Hernandez's book and began reading the first chapter. The language was formal and sometimes difficult, but the concepts resonated with her. She could visualize the mathematical spaces he described, see the connections between seemingly different structures. By the time she reached her stop, Maria had made her decision. Tomorrow she would tell Dr. Patel yes. She would take the chance, step onto a path she never thought possible. That night, Maria called her sister in El Salvador. As the international connection crackled between them, she shared her news. Imagine, Anna, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Me, a university student. Papa would never believe it. Papa always said you were the smartest person he knew, Anna replied. He would believe it. He would be so proud. After they hung up, Maria sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by her salvaged textbooks, the books that had been her private companions for years. Soon they would be joined by new ones, official ones, books she wouldn't have to rescue from dumpsters. One step at a time, she whispered to herself, echoing the words she had told Lynn. That was how she had always approached mathematics. That was how she would approach this new chapter of her life. 2 years passed like the turning pages of a well-loved book. Maria Alvarez sat in the small office she now shared with 2 other graduate teaching assistants, grading calculus homework from first-year students. At 44, she was the oldest teaching assistant in the mathematics department, but that fact had long ceased to feel strange. So much had changed since that rainy day when Professor Chen had mockingly challenged her to solve a problem on the whiteboard. The memory still made her cheeks warm with embarrassment, but it no longer stung. That moment, uncomfortable as it had been, had opened a door she never imagined possible. Maria checked the clock. Nearly time for her meeting with Dr. Hernandez to discuss her research project. She gathered her notes, slipped them into a folder, and left the office. As she walked across campus, students greeted her with smiles and waves. "Hey, Ms. Alvarez," called a young man who had been in her discussion section last semester. "Your tips for the multivariable exam saved me." Maria smiled and waved back. Being recognized for her mind rather than her cleaning cart still felt surreal sometimes. The path hadn't been easy. Her first semester as a special admission student had been terrifying. She had started with just 2 courses, Calculus 3 and Linear Algebra, while continuing to work part-time as a department assistant. The coursework was challenging not because the concepts were difficult, but because the formal language and rigorous proofs required an adjustment from her self-taught methods. There had been nights of tears and frustration, moments when she wondered if Dr. Wilson from physics had been right. Maybe this was all a mistake. But for every moment of doubt, there had been breakthroughs. The first perfect score on an exam. The day Professor Chen asked her to help him review a paper he was writing, because he valued her perspective. The afternoon Dr. Patel had taken her aside and said, "You belong here. Maria, never doubt that." After completing a year of undergraduate courses at an accelerated pace, Maria had been admitted directly to the graduate program with a full scholarship. The story of the cleaning lady mathematician had spread beyond Westlake University, attracting attention from educational foundations eager to support non-traditional students. Maria knocked on Dr. Hernandez's door. Come in," he called cheerfully. As she entered, he was pulling books from his shelves, creating small towers on his already cluttered desk. "Just the person I wanted to see." "We had a meeting scheduled, Dr. Hernandez," Maria reminded him with a smile. His absent-mindedness was legendary in the department. Yes, of course," he said, waving her to a chair. "But something exciting came up this morning." The journal editor called. Maria's heart skipped a beat. "About my paper?" "They're accepting it. With minor revisions." Dr. Hernandez beamed at her like a proud father. "Your approach to differential systems has impressed the reviewers. One of them specifically mentioned the fresh perspective you brought to the topic." Maria sat down, feeling slightly dizzy. Her first academic paper, accepted for publication in the Journal of Applied Mathematical Analysis. She had worked on it for months, developing the ideas that had been germinating since her days of studying salvaged textbooks at her kitchen table. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "Say you'll celebrate," Dr. Hernandez replied. "This is a significant achievement, Maria." As they discussed the reviewer comments and potential revisions, Maria felt a wave of gratitude. Dr. Hernandez had been her strongest advocate from the beginning, never doubting her abilities, always pushing her to trust her unique mathematical instincts. After the meeting, Maria walked to the mathematics building's lobby where a new display case had recently been installed. Inside was a collection of photographs and articles chronicling the department's history. Near the center was a newspaper clipping with the headline, "From Cleaning Floors to Breaking Ground, The Remarkable Journey of Maria Alvarez." Beside it was a photo of Maria standing at a whiteboard, chalk in hand, explaining a concept to a group of students. She rarely looked at the display. It still felt strange to see herself featured among distinguished professors and accomplished alumni. But today, with news of her paper's acceptance, she paused to reflect on the journey. "It never gets old, does it?" said a voice behind her. Maria turned to see Lynn, now in her final year of undergraduate studies. "Seeing yourself up there with all those math legends?" Maria laughed. "I'm hardly a legend." "Not yet," Lynn said with a grin. "But you will be. Professor Chen says your work on differential systems could lead to new applications in climate modeling." "Professor Chen talks too much," Maria replied, but she was smiling. "Are you going to the department dinner tonight?" Lynn asked. "I heard there might be an announcement about you." "I'll be there," Maria said. "Just need to finish grading these papers first." Always the dedicated teacher, Lynn teased. See you tonight. As Lynn walked away, Maria realized how much their relationship had evolved. From student and cleaning lady to colleagues of a sort, both part of the same academic world. Lynn had been right that day on the bench. Being older, having a different background, these things did give Maria an advantage. She approached mathematics differently from those who had followed traditional paths, and increasingly, the department valued that difference. Back in her office, Maria finished grading, then called Rosa Garcia, her former supervisor in the cleaning department. They still met for coffee every other Sunday, maintaining a friendship that bridged Maria's old life and new. The paper got accepted, Maria told her. Dios mío, that's wonderful news, Rosa exclaimed. We must celebrate when you visit this weekend. I'll make those pastries you like. You don't need to go to any trouble. Nonsense, Rosa interrupted. How often does my friend get published in a fancy journal? This calls for pastries at minimum. After the call, Maria gathered her things and headed home to change for the department dinner. Her apartment was different now, still small and modest, but filled with proper bookshelves housing a growing collection of mathematics texts, many gifted by professors who had become mentors and friends. On her desk sat a framed photograph of her father, standing in front of their small home in El Salvador, his arm around a much younger Maria. Beside it was a handwritten letter from her elementary school teacher, Miss Gonzalez, who had written to Maria after learning of her achievements through Ana. I always knew your mind was special, the letter read. You have honored your gift by nurturing it. The department dinner was held in the university's grand hall, with white tablecloths and flickering candles creating a warm atmosphere. Maria sat between Professor Chen and Dr. Patel, feeling far removed from the woman who had once quietly cleaned these same rooms while nobody noticed. After the main course, Dr. Patel tapped her glass and stood up. I have an announcement to make, she said, her voice carrying across the room. As many of you know, our department has been working to create new pathways for talented individuals from non-traditional backgrounds to enter the field of mathematics. She gestured toward Maria. Inspired by the extraordinary journey of Maria Alvarez, who went from our cleaning staff to becoming a valued member of our academic community, we are establishing the Alvarez Fellowship for non-traditional students in mathematics. Applause broke out around the room. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes as Dr. Patel continued. This fellowship will provide full tuition and stipend support to individuals who demonstrate exceptional mathematical ability but lack formal educational credentials. We believe talent can be found anywhere, and it is our responsibility to nurture it wherever we find it. Later that evening, as Maria accepted congratulations from colleagues and students, Professor Chen approached her with a glass of sparkling water in hand. So, he said, was it worth it? Leaving the certainty of your old job for all of this? He gestured around at the academic gathering. Maria considered the question seriously. It was terrifying, she admitted. Still is sometimes. But yes, absolutely worth it. You've changed this department, you know, he told her. Changed how we think about talent, about potential, about who belongs in mathematics. You've changed too, Maria observed with a small smile. You're kinder to your students now. Professor Chen looked embarrassed. Let's just say I've learned not to make assumptions about people's capabilities based on their current circumstances. As the evening wound down, Maria stood by a large window overlooking the campus. Lights illuminated the paths between buildings, students moving like constellations across the darkness. Somewhere out there perhaps was another person with hidden talents, another mind waiting to be discovered. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, not just by education or professional achievement, but by the confidence that comes from being seen, truly seen, for who you are, Maria Alvarez. No longer invisible, no longer just the cleaning lady, but a mathematician with a unique voice and a story that would continue to open doors for others who might follow her unconventional path.